As I fumbled off my belt to go through the metal detector, the pain in my stomach increased, and I practically had to sit on the floor to take my shoes off, terrified of what would happen if I bent at the middle to do so. It was becoming increasingly evident to me that this wasn't just a stomach ache. No, this was something much worse. As a child, I had a bout of diarrhea after a trip to Mexico with my family. I remember the feeling of nausea that swept through me before my child self had surrendered to the gas pains and parked myself on the toilet for an hour, shitting until I felt like I didn't have any bones left. That was how I was feeling now, with several key differences. The pain was worse. The sense of an impending bowel movement was so formidable, it gave me temporary amnesia, and it took all of my willpower, all of it, to clench my butt cheeks together to prevent my sphincter from exploding. A sudden shock of pain racked my body, and I half wondered if I was going to give birth to a Tasmanian devil. The crazy, fever-induced image of said cartoon animal chasing Bugs Bunny through the splashy volcanic shit kettle that was my stomach caused me to elicit a short, maniacal bark of laughter as I approached the metal detector. A wild, distant look in my eyes, sweat now beginning to pour off me like a long-distance runner in Kenya. The security agent on the other side of the detector shot a quick glance over to her co-worker, who narrowed his eyes and made a subtle movement towards his holster. My breathing became uneven as I entered the metal detector, and I realized with alarm that I had taken off my socks without even registering it, and one of my shirt tails was untucked at the front. I held my breath, my eyes bulging dangerously from my head as the machine scanned me. As I shakily moved forward towards the agent for a pat-down, my stomach began to elicit sounds that can only be described as otherworldly. It started off a sort of bubbling sound heard from afar and grew in pitch and intensity at an alarming rate. My jaw dropped in shock as what I can only describe as the sound of an agonized, wailing alley cat in heat with a persistent Doppler effect added to its voice emitted from some nether region of my intestines. The officer's eyes widened in alarm, and she kept her eyes glued to my stomach as she thoroughly patted me down. As she reached my shins, I felt my innards suddenly expand and plummet towards my rectum. With cat-like reflexes, I squeezed my sphincter shut with what seemed like nanoseconds to spare. And I knew that if I didn't get to the bathroom immediately, I would shit myself. With all the effort and all the strength that I could master, I forced my butt cheeks together, knowing that one false move would open the floodgates. I began to walk like a duck, trying to remain as inconspicuous as possible, not even caring now what other people were seeing in front of them. A dishevelled, barefoot, 40-year-old businessman, red-faced and bulgy-eyed, sweating profusely, shaking slightly, and walking without bending his knees. With single-minded intensity, I grabbed my carry-on, shoes and socks from out of the plastic tub that I had passed in the X-ray inspection, and without putting anything back on, I turned on my heels with the intention of finding the nearest restroom and slowly dying there, one squirt at a time. But that's not what happened. I turned to go and found myself staring at 3 armed agents who stopped me and asked me if I would follow them. "Why? What's the matter?" I stammered, wincingly slightly at the act of speech seemed to strain the tenuous and extremely fragile truce I had negotiated between my bowels and the tempest that raged within. "I have to go to the bathroom right now," I pleaded. "Just follow us, please," they said, leaving no room for argument. The other travellers clearing the security check stared with curiosity and revulsion at the spectacle unfolding before them, whispering amongst themselves and hurrying to pack up their belongings and get as far away from me as possible. No doubt assuming that the airport had nabbed some sort of domestic terrorist. If I hadn't been feverishly trying to hold back the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, I likely would have died of shame. With each step I took towards the room that they ushered me into, I felt that my legs would give way. I marvelled at how strong the human will could be. I marvelled that what was essentially patching a hole in the Hoover Dam with bubble gum could actually be sustained indefinitely. Maybe I would make it through this ordeal after all. The room that they brought me into was an examination room. I had pretty much stopped registering details of my environment as my consciousness closed off all but the absolutely necessary functions: breathing, ability to walk. But I snapped back to reality when I heard the snap of rubber. The slow dawning of realization poked through my agony and resolve as I turned to face an agent donning rubber gloves. "Sir, we are going to perform a cavity search on you," a young, fresh-faced agent stated in a firm but emotionless voice. His short-cropped blonde hair was immaculate, and for a crazy moment I wondered if he was an actor, and this was all some sort of elaborate practical joke done to amuse bored kids watching YouTube. He must have taken my tortured silence for resistance, because he looked at me sharply and said, "Lower your pants and underwear, please, and face the desk." Panic started to grip me in its icy grasp, and the sudden adrenaline threatened to destroy my sphincter's bulwarks and rend my anus in two. I inhaled sharply, and with a pained gasp, I doubled up my efforts to clench my cheeks together. "Sir, please," I begged, deferring to this kid in an act of desperation. "I have to go to the bathroom. You can follow me in the stall if you need to, but I had some bad Haribo sugar-free gummy bears, and now I feel like—" But they had stopped listening and smirked at each other. Two of the other agents, a tall, dark-haired female and a shorter, balding, fat man, looked away from me, and I could see them shaking a little as they stifled their laughs. "Sir, face the wall, put your hands on the desk, and spread your cheeks," the young agent stated, a lopsided grin on his face. "But—" I began to protest, but then a fresh shock of pain forced me to stop and lean on the table for support, as an ungodly howling rose from my stomach, something between the dying moans of a woolly mammoth and the sounds of bubble wrap popping underwear. I exhaled shakily, and my focus began to narrow as I rallied for the final battle. Shaking uncontrollably and sweat literally raining down onto the tabletop in front of me, I turned to face the wall and heard a meek, childlike voice pleading from somewhere in the room. "Please," it said, and then again, "Please." From somewhere within me, my mind recognized that this sound had issued from me, although my consciousness had now begun to separate from my body, and I held my breath and prayed to God for strength.